As I'm sure you know, ZBrush can use photographic images to create surface detail. Usually, I do this with photographs or by painting patterns and textures into Photoshop. However, you can also convert sculpted detail in ZBrush directly into a 2D image that you can then use as a texture for creating the same sculpted detail on other surfaces. In this video, I'll show you how to do it. So let's create one of these textures and start sculpting on this gargoyle with it. What I want to do is append a new subtool, just a regular plane. So I'm going to go to Append in my subtool palette and click Plane. I can go click on Plane now, and let's just turn on solo mode so we see only the plane, nothing else. I'm going to hit Shift F to turn on wireframe. Now before I start sculpting on this, what I want to do is get a version of this plane that has just a single polygon square as its lowest subdivision level. So let's see, let's go into geometry. You can see there are no subdivision levels, so we can hit reconstruct subdiv several times until we're all the way down to a single polygon square. Okay, let's drag this back up. And we can actually keep subdividing this a whole bunch of times. I'm going to hit Shift F to turn off wireframe. I want to make sure Z add is turned on. Make sure RGB and materials turned off. And let's see. Okay, just a couple things I want to set up before. Turn focal shift to the middle. Okay, looks good. I'll just hit Control Z to undo that. Now what I want to do is start sculpting a kind of like a leathery lizard skin pattern. So for this I'm going to get the DAM standard brush. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard and hit D for the brushes that start with D, and let's get the DAM standard. Let me get a bigger draw size here, and let's see. Okay, it looks pretty good. I'm actually going to go to stroke, and let's change the lazy mouse steps to something lower so we get fewer dots. Okay, it looks smoother now. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here, and now I just want to start sculpting some random skin-like patterns. And one thing you might notice there is there's a weird glitch. Sometimes ZBrush does that. If that happens, just hit Control Z to undo that. I'm trying to get a variation of thick and thin strokes here, so you might want to change the Z intensity a little bit and get some lighter ones. Really, you could paint any kind of texture. It doesn't necessarily have to be a skin-like texture. You could do bumps or dots or anything interesting. Okay, now that I've got that started, what I want to do is kind of exaggerate some of these. So I'm going to get my clay brush out, B, C, and get the clay brush. I'm going to change the draw size a little bit here and just try sculpting on a few little extra bumps to kind of raise up some of these raised up areas between the creases. Just trying to help it look a little bit more organic here. Get a little bit of interest and variation going on. Don't want it to look all the same or look too robotic or mechanical. Okay, and one other thing, I want to go back to the DAM standard brush. So I'm going to hit B, D, and get that one. And what I want to do is kind of add a little bit more to some of these. So I'm going to hold down Alt so it creates a crease outwards. And I just want to kind of create a little extra oomph, little extra edge around some of these. Just trying to make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, I could probably spend a lot more time on this, but in the interest of moving on with the rest of this tip and this trick, I'm going to stop it right here. All right, so once you've got your sculpting done, we're going to create a displacement map from this detail. Okay, so I'm going to come down to the displacement map subpalette. I'm going to hit Shift D to go down in my subdivision levels, all the way down to the single square. And let's go ahead and hit Create Disp Map. Now you'll notice this doesn't look quite right. And that's because there's a little glitch with ZBrush. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. The UVs that automatically come with the plane don't work quite right with displacement maps, so we want to relay out these UVs. So I'm going to go to Z Plugin, UV Master, and click Unwrap. Okay, now let's hit Create Disk Map. So what this does is it creates a 2D image that is based on the detail difference between the current subdivision level and the highest subdivision level. And it creates a texture map with that. You can see by default in the lower side of this pop-up, it says width 2048 pixels by height 2048 pixels. You can actually change that if you want to. The UV map size, and you could set this to a 4K map, or you could drag this all the way up to an 8K map. But for the most part, 2K works fine. And then what it does is it sort of applies it in your viewport as a bump map. So if we rotate around and look at this from the side, you can see that this detail looks like it's sculpted on is actually an illusion. It's just a bump map. It's just making the surface look like it has that detail. Okay, now let's turn this texture into a brush. Right now, this displacement map is only in this slot right here. So let's hit Clone Disp. And what that does is it moves it over here into the alpha. As an alpha, it's actually going to put texture into the brush. So let's go back to our gargoyle. And I'm going to go up on the subdivisions here on this gargoyle as high as I can. I might even want to add some more subdivisions. So let's hit Control D. And it's up to over 4 million polygons. That should be plenty high detail. And let's try sculpting with this. I'm going to zoom in on a part right here. And let's see what happens if we start sculpting. Okay, so not quite exactly the result you might be looking for. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Let's change some brush settings so that we get a more predictable result with this. I'm going to go to the Stroke menu, and let's change this from stroking out dots to a drag rectangle. So now when we click and drag, what it does is it stamps out a single instance of that pattern. Now, actually, I was using this from the DAM standard brush by default. So let's hit Control Z to undo that. And let's just go with the standard brush. So B, S, and get the standard brush. Okay, now we'll go up to Stroke. And we'll change this to Drag Rect. And we want to go get that alpha again. So I'm just going to click Alpha and just get that same one that we created before. And let's click and drag this out and see what we get. Okay, it's kind of interesting. There's a few issues that we need to fix here, however. Probably the biggest thing that you'll notice is that there's kind of a harsh edge around it. So we can fix that. Let's undo that. Let's go to Alpha and Modify. And what I want to do is change the mid value to 50. So the way that the displacement map is created is that any detail that is neutral comes out 50% gray. So we want to set this to 50. Let's try this again now. Okay, so that mostly gets rid of that harsh edge. There is still a little bit there, but it's not too bad. There's another setting that can help with that a lot. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. We'll go back to Alpha. And what I want to do is turn on Radial Fade. It's RF here. And you'll notice up in the swatch, what you'll see is the higher I bring this, the more it kind of fades off the edges to gray. So usually I find something around like 15 to 20 is a pretty good setting for that. Now we'll click and drag and see what this does again. Okay, so that completely fixed that kind of harsh edge we were getting around that. Okay, so feel free to go around and stamp out different instances of this. You can move around so it's not all coming out in the same direction. You can do it different sizes, so you get big patterns in some places and smaller textures in other places. And just feel free to add this to your model anywhere you feel like it should go. And I'll let you take it from there. Okay, so now we've made a brush that sculpts detail right onto an object based on sculpting we did on a different object. Sometimes I like doing it this way rather than using a photo as an alpha, because a lot of times it could be hard to predict how a photo will look when it's used as an alpha. However, if you create the alpha from sculpting, then you know exactly what it's going to look like because you sculpted it in the first place.